Some places still quite warm across the eastern parts where we'll see the longest spells of sunshine. A few more of those showers drifting north across Scotland during Saturday evening. A bit more wet weather working into Northern Ireland at the same time. A big swirl of low pressure which will continue to throw showers across the country on Sunday, mostly in the west where it'll be windy, generally dry and sunny in the east.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues of the day and we look at them in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. It's by-election blues for Boris as red and yellow take over two Tory towns. Is it just a mid-term slump, or will it give the government a much-needed kick up the backside? Boris is in Kigali. No, he hasn't deported himself. He's there meeting other Commonwealth leaders, with future leader of the Commonwealth, Prince Charles, there too. It's a big moment for Britain. Can we woo the world when it counts? We're expecting the Prime Minister to give a press conference live from Rwanda in the next hour. And they only investigate a half of all burglaries, so surely it's time there was a top-up at the cop shop. That's apparently about to happen. More police are being promised. We bring you a GB News exclusive on just that. And I'll bring you some forthright thoughts on the other stories doing the rounds today in my agenda. Get in touch with your thoughts too on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet the programme at GB News. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he will keep going despite suffering double by-election defeats and the resignation of his party chairman. A warning, the following footage contains flashing images. In the Devon seat of Tiverton and Honiton, the Liberal Democrats overturned a 24,000 Tory majority, while in West Yorkshire, Labour reclaimed the Redwall seat of Wakefield. The Tory party chair reacted to the results by handing in his resignation, saying somebody needed to take responsibility. Boris Johnson suggested the results are mainly down to the cost of living crisis.
Absolutely true that we've had some tough by-election results, and they've been, I think, a reflection of a lot of things, but we've got to recognise that voters are going through a tough time at the moment, and I think that as a government I've got to listen to what people are saying, and in particular to the difficulties people are facing over the cost of living, which is, I think, for most people the number one issue.
Well, after his party's by-election victory, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, has called Wakefield the birthplace of the next Labour government.
The Tory party is absolutely imploding. They know they're out of ideas and they're out of touch. And if they had any decency, they'd get out of the way for the next Labour government, because what happened here in Wakefield was people exercising their judgment on this Conservative government and voting no confidence.
Meanwhile, Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey's been visiting Tiverton to celebrate his party's by-election victory. He said it's time to show Boris Johnson the door.
Today, the Liberal Democrats have shown that the rule of Boris Johnson and this uncaring Conservative government can be ended. But today is just a start. So join us and let's get rid of them.
Meanwhile, in Rwanda, Boris Johnson's met with the Prince of Wales at the Commonwealth summit in Kigali. It's not yet known what was discussed, but it follows comments made in private by Prince Charles, reportedly calling the government's policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda appalling. Speaking at the summit's opening ceremony earlier, Prince Charles told Commonwealth leaders they have the freedom to choose whether or not they become a republic.
The benefit of long life brings me the experience that arrangements such as these can change calmly and without rancour. We should never forget the things which do not change. The close and trusted partnership between Commonwealth members, our common values and shared goals, and perhaps most importantly, the strong and enduring connections between the peoples of the Commonwealth, which strengthen us all.
Child killer James Watson has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 15 years for the murder of 6-year-old Ricky Neve in 1994. The 41-year-old was 13 when he lured the schoolboy to the woods near his home in Peterborough and strangled him. Watson was identified by DNA on the victim's clothes following a re-examination of the case 2 decades later. Former Assistant Chief Constable Paul Fullwood says Watson hasn't shown any remorse.
I've seen somebody who's a fantasist, a compulsive liar, a sexual predator, and there were missed opportunities. And, you know, there's lessons that have been learned, and those are lessons that will be learned in terms of moving forward.
Members of the RMT working on the London Underground have voted to continue industrial action as the dispute over jobs, pay and conditions continues. 91% voted to strike in the coming weeks and months, although no dates have yet been decided. Train services have been disrupted this week due to RMT walkouts, with a 3rd day of strikes planned tomorrow. More unions say they'll ballot staff next week, making further disruption likely over the summer. And the President of Ukraine has called on Glastonbury festival goers to put pressure on politicians to help restore peace in his country. Speaking via video link, Volodymyr Zelensky said he wants the war to stop before it ruins lives in other nations around the world. He also urged the crowd to help prove that freedom always wins.
Glastonbury is the greatest concentration of freedom these days, and I ask you to share this feeling with everyone whose freedom is under attack. Spread the truth about Russia's war. Help Ukrainians who are forced to flee their homes because of the war. Find our United 24 charity platform and put pressure on all the politicians you know to help restore peace in Ukraine.
Powerful words there from Volodymyr Zelensky. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About.
We cannot carry on with business as usual. Somebody must take responsibility. Excoriating words to send to the man with the biggest job in the land. Written by the man who, until this morning, was in charge of running the Prime Minister's party. Oliver Dowden's resignation letter as he steps down as Conservative Party chairman after trammelling in 2 by-elections. Well, today, 4,000 miles away in East Africa, Boris must feel blue because yellow and red have trounced him in seats at opposite ends of the country and opposite ends of the political spectrum, begging the question, who is he pleasing? He survived a vote of no confidence from his own party a mere month ago. But the question many might now be asking is, can the party survive him? Well, I'm joined now by GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom, it doesn't look good for the Tories, does it? But shall we be rather pragmatic and put it in a bit of context? It's midterm, and actually when it comes to Labour, they got 8,000 fewer votes in Wakefield than they did when they got defeated last time round.
This is true. The turnouts were low. Turnouts traditionally in by-elections are low, and indeed there are local factors to these by-elections, the reasons for the by-elections in the first place, which might make most people think this is a very challenging pitch for the Conservative Party. Of course, in Tiverton, you had the Conservative Member of Parliament, Neil Parish, resign after being found to have watched pornography in the House of Commons. And in Wakefield, in incredibly serious circumstances, the former Conservative MP, Imran Ahmed Khan, being convicted of being a sex offender with a sexual offence against a 15-year-old boy. This was the local context for these by-elections, and I think it would be remiss to ignore those factors. But yes, on top of that, what Conservatives will say is that the turnout was relatively low, and of course we are 2.5 years into a government. Midterm, often by-elections are lost, and a stat that I heard earlier today was that out of every by-election that takes place mid-term, 6 out of 10 of them tend to return to the party that they were before at the next election. However, that's in the pro-Tory basket. In the anti-Tory basket is the scale of defeat. And the scale of defeat in Tiverton in particular is really quite remarkable. And it's why these results are perhaps more seismic than those factors might suggest. The idea that a Conservative majority of such proportion could be overturned by an insurgent Liberal Democrat campaign, a Liberal Democrat campaign which, let's not forget, in the previous election came third, in 2017 came third, and in 2015 came fourth. This is where the Lib Dems were in this seat, and then to take it from the Conservatives in the way that they have is a really quite momentous moment. The question that Conservative MPs will be having to grapple with is, to what extent could this be replicated in a general election? Lib Dems are very, very good at by-elections, and we've seen this now 3 times in this Parliament, where big Conservative majorities have been overturned by the Liberal Democrats, really delivering a strong result for that party when they focused all of their national effort in on these seats, and when we are in the middle of a parliamentary term. Could it be replicated at a general election? That remains to be seen, but certainly the message of these by-elections, one up in the red wall in the north, one down in what the Lib Dems call the blue wall in the south, it shows the Conservative coalition splitting fairly dramatically.
Yeah, Tom, thank you. Excellent summary there. You're so good at your job, you know. Sometimes I just look at you and wonder and think, he knows his onions, does our Tom. Well, let's cross now to our reporters Anna Riley in Wakefield and Jeff Moody in Tiverton. Anna, let's start with you. Give us a sense of the mood there. What do you think were the motivating factors for that vote to switch?
Good afternoon, Alex. Yes, the mood here is that people were expecting this vote. That's what the polls were saying. I was coming to Wakefield weeks before this by-election and asking people, and the majority of people were saying they'd either not bother voting at all because they felt apathetic. That was somewhat reflected in these by-election results. There was a 39.1% turnout for them, and other people were saying they were going to vote Labour because they just didn't trust the Conservative government. Like Tom was mentioning, it's set in the context of the former Conservative MP here being given a criminal record and having to step down because of that. And people also told me Partygate had affected their decision as well on voting Conservative. But they're saying now, you know, it's MP Simon Lightwood that's in. He got a majority of 4,925 for the Labour Party, and they're saying now they want him to deliver on his promises. They're concerned about the cost of living and they want investment here in the city. So that's what they're looking towards their new MP to do from now.
Anna, thank you so much. Well, let's hear from Jeff now, who's down in Tiverton. Jeff, that was Anna's summary of what the voters in Wakefield might be thinking in order to scrap their Conservative MP and replace him with a Labour one. What about what's been going on in Devon and that dramatic switch to the Liberal Democrats?
You know, it's interesting, Alex, talking to people here on the streets throughout the day, because you hear all sorts of views. You know, only a couple of hours ago, you had Sir Ed Davey at a big door saying Boris must be shown the door, and everyone cheering and saying yay, yay for the Liberal Democrats. And as they did that, a van went past, the window came down on the van, and somebody shouted out, "We love you, Boris." So, you know, there is still support for Boris. You talk to some people here. I've talked to somebody just now, and he said, you know, what are you filming? And you say, oh, we're here for the by-election. And they say, what by-election? Which kind of punctures the egos of us journalists who are using hyperbole like mad today. And today really is the day for hyperbole. I mean, unprecedented is a word that I really don't want to come out with because it's overused, but it is unprecedented. Let's just say it's never happened before. This scale of defeat for the Conservatives has never happened in this area before. They've been voting Conservative for 100 years now. Although this constituency has only been here since 1997, they were voting Conservative here a long time before. So it is extremely significant. There you are, there's no hyperbole in the word significant, but it is very, very significant for the Conservatives that they have lost here. It's also significant for Labour too, because don't forget, they were the second. They were the runner-up last time round. By my accounts, they've lost their deposit this time round. So it is still a defeat for them too. But the reason I think that the Liberal Democrats have done so well here, Alex, is partly because of the old reasons, Partygate, because of the unsavoury nature with which the MP here, Neil Parish, had to resign. You know, the whole watching porn in the House of Commons, all of that, but also the character of Richard Ford, the Lib Dem candidate. He's a local man, he's an army major, he's very personable, and he's worked hard, and that hard work has certainly been recognised today.
Jeff, thank you so much. Really good synopsis there. And thank you to Anna. It's great to get a picture from those two key constituencies who fought by-elections last night. Well, joining me now on the show is the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Vince Cable. Sir Vince, fantastic to have you on today of all days. You must be extremely happy with this result.
Yes, it was spectacular. I went down there a couple of times and it was very clear that there was a big movement in our direction. You know, we put in a very, very intensive campaign, concentrated all our resources on it. And, you know, there's a real guerrilla army, you know, highly motivated people coming from Scotland, from East Anglia, north of England. And I think, you know, the morale will be massively lifted. We've had third by-election on the trot. We've done extremely well. And it bodes well for the general election when it comes.
Having these two by-elections happen simultaneously is it shows what Boris had to do in many respects to get that whopping majority back in 2019 and bring together voters from largely opposite sides of the political spectrum. It seems maybe the magic is fading and the divisions are appearing once again. Do the Liberal Democrats now smell blood? Are the Liberal Democrats now going to focus on some of those Conservative votes that might not like the sort of cut of Boris's jib right now, the sort of more populist policies that we're hearing coming out? And, you know, do you think there's a lot of ground for you as a party to now make?
Yes, I think when Ed Davey talks about the blue wall, that's what he's talking about. There's a lot of people who used to vote Conservative, middle-of-the-road, One Nation Conservatives who are pretty disgusted by what's happening. And they feel much more comfortable with the Liberal Democrats. We also, I think one of the significant factors about Oniton was the enormous number of Labour people who switched to Lib Dem, now voting tactically. And that has been a a factor in the seats we've won in the past, including Twickenham when I was the MP, where there was a kind of coalition of people who, didn't want the Conservatives and found us an attractive alternative. And not too many people have mentioned that, but the scale of tactical voting in Honiton was very powerful, and it will carry through to the general election.
Is necessary, some might say, in certain elections. But really what people want to hear are policies, and should surely be electing people off the back of what they plan to do in government as a party. What sort of policies were you putting forward down in Tiverton and Honiton to attract voters? What is the Lib Dems' national agenda right now?
Well, the big issue, of course, as you referred to in your introduction, is about cost of living. And Ed Davey was proposing one specific measure that would make a big difference, which is using the power of the Treasury, the tax powers of the Treasury, to cut taxes through the value-added tax level. That would be disinflationary, and it would take some of the steam, at least, out of inflation. Some of the problems are imported, but there are things the British government could do, and we've proposed that specific measure.
So Vince Cable, it's been fantastic having you on the programme. Thank you so much. Well done on a good Lib Dem victory down in Devon last night. Well, let's talk now to Associate Political Editor at The Telegraph, Christopher Hope. Christopher, great friend of the show. Interesting. Vince Cable there saying what the Lib Dems were saying on the doorsteps was cut taxes, especially VAT. Interesting, I add, because that is pretty much a power that the government's got because of Brexit, and the Lib Dems famously, obviously, campaigned to remain. Is this the real reason, do you think, why the Conservatives are now failing to keep that majority they got? They got Brexit done, but they've done nothing with it.
It's not just tax, though, is it? It's about leadership of Boris Johnson. It's about if he's the right person for the next election. Is he now toxic at the opinion polls? What's happening today is people are wondering why Oliver Dowden resigned this morning, because Tories had priced in the overnight defeat in Tiverton and Honiton. I had reported a 5,000 majority for the Liberal Democrats a few weeks ago. That was out there. The feeling was that lots of votes were cast by post, which means they were filled in 2 weeks ago when the no confidence vote happened in Boris Johnson. So they thought that they were going to lose Tiverton and Honiton. They'd written off Wakefield. Why did Oliver Dowden go? Now, the big question this weekend, is will more ministers resign? What's been missing from this whole crisis about Boris Johnson is no other cabinet ministers have quit. That may start happening this weekend. If that happens, that might lead to more concern about Boris Johnson. And if enough more Tories who were not in the 148 Tory MPs who did have no confidence in Johnson, if they put letters in to Graham Brady or make clear he's got to go, and this group, the 1922 committee, might change the rules and allow a second vote of no confidence in Johnson. But what's going to happen first is there needs to be a movement against him.
Yeah, just when Boris thought he was out of hot water, clearly he is not. Christopher, thank you for coming on, albeit briefly. We'll see you again very soon. Let's talk now to former Downing Street advisor and political commentator Sean Worth. Sean, what do you make of the results? I mean, Oliver Dowden resigning last night. Christopher Hope, they're saying the Tories had priced in by-election defeats, and yet he felt compelled to have to leave an extremely senior position in the party. Is the party in trouble?
Certainly the Conservative Party did expect to lose both Wakefield and Tiverton. They weren't saying it publicly, but I know that they were. Tiverton is a really big blow. I do think it will flip back at the general election, because I don't think people will. I think people have used it as a protest vote, and quite rightly, given the state of everything. Your question on kind of what does it mean for the party? I think Chris Hope there does raise a big issue around Oliver Dowden's resignation. Oliver was a fantastic, really well-liked MP and minister, incredibly capable. I don't know if it's partly due to the fact that Boris Johnson shuffled him down out of a executive cabinet role at DCMS and put in Nadine Dorries, who's perfectly nice, but I think everybody sees as a less capable person in that brief. And he's kind of jumping before he gets pushed, or whether he's gone off and thought, well, someone's going to take responsibility, as his letter said, and it doesn't look like Boris Johnson is, so he's left. I mean, he only sent it at 5 o'clock this morning, but I think that is, as Chris said, I think that is probably the big issue next to unravel. But in terms of where things go next, I think the big thing to watch actually I would say, is MPs' reaction. And a big thing to me is that Boris Johnson didn't stick around for these by-elections, and his communications people thought it was a better idea that he went to Rwanda to the Commonwealth summit. But all that's happened, I said it was a bad idea yesterday when it was announced that he was going to do that. All that has happened is that, as you've seen, journalists have just chased him over there and asked him questions about Tiverton anyway, and he's messed up the communications plan that Prince Charles had around the Commonwealth summit. So he's messed that up and messed up the comms around the by-elections here. So I think Boris Johnson really needs to get some good people around him. That'll be really tough now at this state of the electoral cycle.
Sean, thank you. Really interesting insight there. Former Downing Street advisor and political commentator. My studio guest today is Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party, which is focused on restoring public trust and confidence in politics. Gina, people might say that these Tory defeats is a lot about what you stand for, about people losing faith and losing trust in politics. Surprisingly, when we did Vox Pops the other day, Partygate still coming up. Is there a sense that Boris Johnson was very much a feel-good candidate when he came into office in 2019, uniting both sides of the Conservative Party after the Brexit schism, but the magic's wearing off a little bit?
I think you've got the Boris Johnson that was always the Boris Johnson. He hasn't changed. I think people are just waking up to who he really is. But there are lots of things that have been said by previous commentators that I think are really interesting to unpack. One of the things that Tom said was that the turnout wasn't very high. It wasn't very high in Wakefield with 39%. Actually, in Honiton, in Tiverton and Honiton, it was 52%, so it was high. And yes, there was a lot of tactical voting there. But the postal vote, that 30% that voted postal when the vote of no confidence was going through Parliament, I think they were sending a message to the MPs to say, well, you haven't got him out. We're going to actually make our voices heard. Because the three things that the electorate really is concerned about from when we're going on the doorstep is corruption, sleaze, and the fact that you've got these really poor ways of assessing MPs. I mean, you know, the two of them, the by-elections happened because of the incredibly poor processes they have for electing people to candidacy in the Conservative parties, both for depravity, sexual depravity, which is extraordinary that they got to their positions. And then also you've got the economy. The electorate, when they vote and they think about in the general election, that's what we have to think about next. It's the electorate as well. It is going to think about the economy. And this government, under Boris Johnson, are failing to get a grip of the economy, and they're failing to get a grip on the cost of living crisis that is only going to get worse. So he is a campaigner, not a leader. And I think that's what people, his own party, are beginning to wake up to, possibly very late. But I think also the fact that I don't believe he cares about the Conservative Party, because if he really did, he would step down and he would actually act with honour and integrity. I think Boris cares more about Boris than he does about the Conservative Party.
Gina, excoriating views there. Thank you so much. What are your views? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the PM has been meeting with Prince Charles in Rwanda. And after the royal reportedly criticised the government's asylum policy, I'd have liked to be a fly on the wall. Time for a short break now.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the plane that was supposed to take migrants for processing in Rwanda never took off, except, of course, in the headlines. What ended up looking like a PR exercise to get the public back on the side of the government has now had a stake driven right through its heart. Because if the policy was a populist vote winner, it's now been put head-to-head with the other big issue that's actually winning the Prime Minister plaudits, Ukraine. Asked by heads of state at the Commonwealth annual meeting if refugees from the war-torn country could be deported if they arrived illegally, Boris was forced to admit that this could theoretically happen. Well, someone who allegedly wasn't impressed by the policy is Prince Charles, who is also in Rwanda to curry favour as the future head of the Commonwealth. And he's having a bit of an Orcs time too, bringing up the horrors of slavery in a bid to stay in tune with countries whose public are increasingly questioning the role of the royal family and former colonies of the British Empire. Well, here's what Prince Charles had to say on the issue of acknowledging the wrongs which have shaped our past to unlock the power of the Commonwealth's common future.
While we strive together for peace, prosperity and democracy, I want to acknowledge that the roots of our contemporary association run deep into the most painful period of our history. I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many, as I continue to deepen my own understanding of slavery's enduring impact. If we are to forge a common future that benefits all our citizens, we too must find ways, new ways to acknowledge our past. Quite simply, this is a conversation whose time has come.
Well, joining me in the studio now is GB royal reporter Cameron Walker. Cameron, what else did the Prince have to say in his speech?
Well, I think it was very interesting, the audience that he said it to. It was of course, there were Caribbean leaders amongst that audience, and he spoke about slavery and the wrongdoings of the past. And those, of course, are islands where slaves were taken to work on plantations. And we know that of the 14 realms where the Queen is still head of state, apart from the UK, some are very much rumoured to start the process of removing the Queen as head of state and become republics. And that is something else which Prince Charles spoke about in his speech. He said each member's constitutional arrangement as republic or monarchy matter for each member country to decide. In other words, it's up to you. He also went on to kind of alludes to the fact that there would be no hard feelings if he decided, if the country decided to become a republic. Of course, Prince Charles is future king. He is future head of the Commonwealth. So I think it's very significant at this time that he decided to bring it up.
Yeah, and I understand that Boris Johnson and Prince Charles were set to be meeting afterwards. There was a lot of rumours of whether they'd be talking about the Rwanda migrant plan, given that it's been alleged that Prince Charles didn't particularly like the idea of the policy. Any information on that?
Well, the meeting has finished. We know it only lasted for around 15 minutes or so. A source close to the Prince has told me that, just like with meetings with Her Majesty the Queen, conversations between Prince Charles and the Prime Minister will remain strictly private. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room, Alex. As you said, there were rumours and reports that Prince Charles branded the Rwandan asylum seeker policy appalling. And the Prime Minister actually did say, but of course he's now backtracked the idea that if Prince Charles did bring it up in the meeting, he would not be afraid to tell Charles face-to-face the benefits of this asylum seeker policy. He has, as I said, backtracked on that, so I doubt we'll get any further details on exactly what was said in that meeting, because, of course, according to Clarence House, they said a few weeks ago when that story emerged that the Prince remains politically neutral. And, of course, as future king, he very much has to do that.
Cameron, thank you. Gina, I really want to know your thoughts on the lot of this. What strikes me is, you know, global Britain, post-Brexit, a lot of people cited the Commonwealth, the importance of the Commonwealth, potential huge trading relationships with all four corners of the globe. And with the Queen soon likely to be succeeded by Prince Charles, touchwood not too soon, this should have been a big moment for Britain. And it seems all a bit of a pickle.
Well, I'm the daughter of a Commonwealth country. You know, I was born as a British under the Commonwealth in British Guiana, which is now Guyana, and we became independent. And I think, you know, Charles had a particular agenda, which was to talk about climate change and the work that he's doing in his foundation and building Africa. And as you say, that entire agenda has been now pushed aside because of Rwanda. And I think it's a terrible muddle because everybody's in it for themselves, if that makes sense right now. And I think, you know, the Commonwealth itself, I have a much more basic issue with it in that I think it's a colonial hangover and actually shouldn't be there. I mean, you know, most of the countries want to be independent. They've also got in the Caribbean things called CARICOM, which is a different organization. You've got the African Union. You've got these countries working on a different level. But let me just talk about Rwanda for a moment, because I think absolutely right that the Prince, future king, shouldn't be making political statements, but that doesn't mean he was wrong, because Rwanda was really a PR stunt. It's not a policy. And if you think about it, just on these terms, the deal is 120 million to send 500 people a year. We get about 28,000 refugees coming over in the boats, and as they say, illegal. What are we going to do with them the rest of the time, or the rest of these people? It was not thought through, and it is literally a stunt. And it's cruel, it's hurting our reputation internationally, and it's literally playing to a very nasty part of our electorate here.
Gina, thank you. Well, there you are. I want to know your views on all of it. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, summer of discontent continues with BA airport staff set to go on strike, potentially nosediving many people's holiday plans. Now, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
It's 2:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he'll keep going despite suffering double by-election defeats and a resignation from his party chairman. A warning: the following footage contains flashing images. The Liberal Democrats overturned a 24,000 Tory majority in the Devon seat of Tiverton and Honiton, while in West Yorkshire, Labour reclaimed the Red Wall seat of Wakefield. The Tory party chair, Oliver Dowden, reacted to the results by resigning, saying somebody needed to take responsibility. Following the results, Boris Johnson said he will listen to voters.
Absolutely true that we've had some tough by-election results, and they've been, I think, a reflection of a lot of things, but we've got to recognise that voters are going through a tough time at the moment, and I think that as a government, I've got to listen to what people are saying, and in particular to the difficulties people are facing over the cost of living, which is, I think, for most people the number one issue.
Well, speaking in Rwanda there, Boris Johnson met with the Prince of Wales at the Commonwealth Summit in the capital, Kigali, earlier. It's not yet known what was discussed, but it follows comments made in private by Prince Charles, reportedly calling the government's policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda appalling. Speaking at the summit's opening ceremony earlier, Prince Charles told Commonwealth leaders they have the freedom to choose whether or not they become a republic. The President of Ukraine has called on Glastonbury festival goers to put pressure on politicians to help restore peace in his country. Speaking via video link, Volodymyr Zelensky said he wants the war to stop before it ruins lives in other nations around the world. He also urged the crowd to help prove that freedom always wins.
Glastonbury is the greatest concentration of freedom these days. And I ask you to share this feeling with everyone whose freedom is under attack. Spread the truth about Russia's war. Help Ukrainians who are forced to flee their homes because of the war. Find our United 24 charity platform and put pressure on all the politicians you know to help restore peace in Ukraine.
TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the rail strikes have not been resolved, and now it looks as though there are going to be mass walkouts in the airline industry too. Meaning you may as well buy that chimney and patio heater you eyed up and hunker down for a staycation in your own back garden. Because in backlog Britain, the don't work created by the pandemic has now become the won't work in its aftermath. Every aspect of getting from A to B is seemingly unravelling and made even worse by the fact you need to take out a small loan to fill your petrol tank. But it's not only a UK phenomenon. Crippling staff shortages following layoffs during the pandemic are also being exacerbated by angry strikes all over the world. Despite governments using your cash to prop up the travel sector when the world was shut down, you don't get to go anywhere now it's opened back up. It's become a giant screaming mess where going on holiday is like a game of travel roulette. Well, joining me now on the show is GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins, who's at Heathrow Airport right now. Paul, what's the latest?
The latest is that talks are ongoing between the GMB and Unite Union and British Airways. They're trying to reach some sort of a deal so these strikes will be averted. Now, we don't have any dates for the strikes. At the earliest, it will be the 8th of July, somewhere up to the 22nd of July. That is legally the earliest that they can call them. In terms of why they're striking, so this is 700 members of British Airways staff. These are the mostly female staff that work on the check-in desks when you get to the airport and then at the boarding gate on the other side of security. And essentially they're voting because they're voted to strike because their pay was cut by 10% during the pandemic. They now want it put back to where it was. The airline themselves have offered them a 10% one-off payment. They're saying no to that. They're saying they want their pay put back up. They want back pay for the time that it was held down. And the justification for that is, firstly, they say management have had their pay put back to pre-pandemic levels, so why can't we? Secondly, they've had to put up with a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of physical abuse when passengers arrive at the airport and their flights have been cancelled. Or there are IT problems, there are staff shortages. Essentially, passengers are frustrated by decisions that have been made by management, nothing to do with them, but because they're at the coalface, they're taking a lot of abuse for it and they're not getting paid what they should be for it. So they're saying, we're going to walk out. British Airways are saying they're disappointed with that industrial action. They're saying that we lost £4 billion in revenue during the pandemic. We can only afford to give you a one-off payment. And that actually, some of your colleagues who have not voted to strike have accepted that payment. The airline are also saying that less than 50% of their customer-facing staff here at Heathrow at Terminals 3 and 5 are actually involved in this dispute, and so that the effect of the strike won't be as great, and that where there are gaps on strike days, we'll have managers who will step in to fill the void. So they're putting on a brave face and saying this isn't going to be that big, we're going to cover it anyway. But given that there have been staff shortages already, which have led to flight cancellations earlier in the year, this is really the last thing you need when you're trying to reinstill confidence in passengers when it comes to flying out of this country.
Travel agency. Pool number 2. I mean, strikes on BA planned. They're saying it won't cause much disruption, but this is becoming a familiar scene, isn't it, around the world in lots of airports. In Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, reports of thousands of flights being cancelled in America as well. Industrial action in France. How difficult is it now for people to travel? If you've booked a flight and you've planned a holiday, what are the chances it's going to be able to go ahead?
Well, we're seeing the pains of coming out of the pandemic and an industry trying to recover. And it's not an industry you can switch on overnight. It does take some months to get things back to normal. But yes, there are a lot of issues which are all combining at the same time to cause enormous frustration for consumers. I think it's worth bearing in mind, over 90% of flights are going as scheduled. They're operating as normally. There may be a slight delay, but in the main, the vast majority are unaffected. The problem is, of course, that even 5% of flights being cancelled or severely delayed adds up to many tens of thousands of passengers being affected. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. And I don't see it getting too much better until after the peak summer period.
And this goes hand in hand with what we saw before with chaotic scenes at airports without ground handlers there to do things like load baggage on and off aeroplanes with staff shortages. Is that making things worse as well?
Staff shortages is the number one issue the industry is facing for a number of reasons, and not just in the UK, as you say. We're seeing that those who've been laid off or put on furlough during the pandemic have often gone off to other sectors, perhaps attracted by higher pay or attracted by better working hours and shift conditions, and they haven't come back to the sector. And the aviation industry, not just in the UK, but globally, has a huge job to do in making itself look much more attractive again and promoting why it's such a good industry to work in, which it is. You know, I've worked in it for over 20 years. It's an exciting sector, but it's lost that glamour, or some of that glamour, during the pandemic and lockdown uncertainty, and that's what's put people off. Until more people come into the industry, we're going to carry on seeing all sorts of issues.
Out of the woods yet. Paul Charles from the PC Travel Agency, thank you ever so much. Gina, listening to Paul number 1, our reporter Paul's report there, that these staff had their pay cut by 10% during the pandemic, and that's never been brought back up to what it was before. Now, of course, we're facing 10% inflation, so it's almost, it's a 20% reduction in pay. Yet the managers, or they've been looked after, that actually makes me really cross.
And it makes me really cross. And I say this, you know, we have to get to a place where what I call is responsible capitalism, because these companies, you know, first of all, most of the people striking are women. So the women decided that they would take this pay cut, and they're not getting back. And as you say, it's a 20% hit to their package because of inflation and that 10% reduction. But the bosses, as far as I'm aware, the industry, not just in the UK, actually had a big jamboree somewhere in the Middle East, and, you know, went to an event where Jennifer Lopez was singing, and they've all given themselves great big bonuses, and, you know, they're not suffering. And that's what's fundamentally wrong, not just in the airline industry, but in all industries where the bosses are awarding themselves bonuses and salary increases. Bear in mind the MPs are doing it too, but people low down who are actually the ordinary workers are the ones who are suffering. And it is fundamentally immoral that they are not getting a better pay deal.
Yeah, Gina, do you know, it's something that I rant on about a lot. I think in the 1970s, the last time we had a lot of industrial action on this scale, people at the top were paid 10 times more than their workers. Now the average is 63 times more.
Well, in my world of investments, pre the global financial crisis, 10 years before that, we saw the most outrageous salaries. You know, salaries are now out of control when it comes to, I think, executive level. And we've got to have some semblance of responsibility about how they actually look after their shareholders, but also their staff.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Wise words, Gina. I want to know what your views are on this. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Now, the policing minister has exclusively told GB News he's very confident the government will meet its target of 20,000 new police officers across England and Wales by next March.
Silver BMW X3, showing insurance not held. Insurance not held.
On patrol with a team from Suffolk Constabulary Sentinel Unit in Ipswich Town Centre. They're tasked with combating drug crime. As they patrol, they're pulled over by a member of the public.
I just saw two lads in there exchanging something.
As they turn the vehicle, one of the two young men runs off. Another is grabbed on his bike.
I didn't see anything, man.
Yeah, OK, no, all right, OK.
With both eventually detained, officers find a bag of cannabis and arrest one of the men for dealing.
That is 120 quid worth of cannabis right there.
These units are being assisted by the recruitment of dozens of new officers across the force. On foot patrol in Ipswich, two of Suffolk's recent recruits.
Hiya, you all right?
Hannah Barrell and Megan Groom joined the force just over a year ago, part of the uplift of thousands of new officers across England and Wales. Hannah told us it's certainly a challenging job, but says it's absolutely the right move for her.
You're the one running to the danger, not away from it. So you do have to have a bit of a backbone in that sense. But you know you want to better your community and you want to help those vulnerable people that you might be going to.
Megan joined the force after studying criminology.
It's a tough job, physically and emotionally. Sometimes you do see some hard things that you sort of have to try and detach yourselves from. But I say to people, you don't, like myself, you don't know until you try.
So much going on! Can you just try and take a deep breath?
At police headquarters, the latest recruits are being put through challenging scenarios, watched over by the policing minister.
Wait, yeah, listen up, listen up. That car is sound out. Oh, sorry, you're under arrest. For what?
Although the police service has been hit by several recent scandals, Kit Malthouse believes the vast majority of the public still have confidence in the police, and many would be happy to make it their career.
We cannot take that trust for granted, and police leadership from top to bottom realise that you have to constantly reinforce those bonds of trust. So these extra 20,000 police officers that we're recruiting, making sure that a good proportion of them are out on the streets in uniform, building that bond every day. That's all part of the mix as well, and we cannot take that trust for granted. I know every police officer understands that.
These training scenarios are vital in preparing new recruits for what they might face out on the streets. Policing leaders say that those who opt for a career on the front line protecting the public, well, for them, this is a job like no other. The government has now added 13,500 new officers to police ranks across England and Wales. With a new recruitment drive launched this week, the policing minister says he's very confident they'll meet their overall target of 20,000 new officers by next March. Mark White, GB News, Ipswich.
Well, my studio guest today is Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party, focused on restoring public trust and confidence in politics. Well, is the public also in a position to start trusting the police force again? At one point, there was this importation of anti-police movements, really, from America, and the police force itself has been heavily cut. Accusations they're not turning up to crimes and solving things.
I think there's a much more fundamental problem with trust in the police force, because scandal after scandal, be it from, recently we saw child Q who got strip searched, and actually we found out today that there are 7 more children that have been strip searched without adult search. So, that's disgraceful. But then you've got what happened with Sarah Everard. Then you've got the 2 sisters dead sisters whose photographs were shared. You've got all the misogyny reports. There's fundamental problems within the police force that need to be addressed before you can start attracting people into the force in the numbers you need. And this whole policy announcement today is not new. It was 2019 that Boris Johnson himself said that they were going to recruit another 20,000 police officers. They haven't done it. And anyway, that's not going to replace the 23,000+ that under the Conservative government for 12 years they've actually cut. The police force is vital to keeping us safe and secure. And we've got to have a trusted police force. And you have to solve both problems. You have to solve the issues within the police force before you can attract the right people.
Thank you, Gina. Well, I've been about a bit. I've lived in India, China, Ghana, Kenya, and the dreaded Brussels. And from all of that, I've my own pretty rooted idea of the big picture when it comes to international relations. It goes something like this. The EU's one-stop shop for big business has screwed over Africa. China screws over Africa, but got in there because everyone else pretty much walked away. India should be our best mate, but they're not. And Britain has a huge duty of care to the Commonwealth, which is why I wanted us to leave the EU and get on with doing something about that. So the summit in Rwanda really does matter. The sands are shifting with a new global axis forming, and we've been out of touch for far too long. Let's hope Boris and Charles can somehow sprinkle some magic in Kigali, because the time has to be now. Well, in other news, the NHS is about to face its first medical negligence case over transgender care. A man who had surgery to remove his genitals now says he is traumatised at being castrated and has been left infertile and incontinent. He claims he woke up knowing he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The big question then is whether he received enough mental health support before being allowed to make such a drastic decision. For me, it's simple. Gender dysphoria is a psychological condition, and you shouldn't use saws and scalpels to treat problems of the mind. It's a tragic case, and doubtless the first of many, as kids are increasingly being cruelly brainwashed into wanting to change their gender. And it turns out Robinsons is ending an almost 90-year partnership with Wimbledon. The UK squash maker's lemon barley water was even once made at the All England Tennis Club. Well, look, I know someone else who's regularly supported by squash. In fact, she's become quite notorious for it after a wild and, may I add, untrue story published by a left-wing magazine started circulating about diva-like demands for the orange stuff. Oh, it's me. I am the Amy Winehouse of the cordial world, insisting there's a bottle of the stuff on my rider. Good old squash, a real British peculiarity. Try finding orange and pineapple outside the UK. Doesn't exist. So if Robinsons wants a new commercial partnership, I can reveal it is the power behind my on-screen volleys. Well, Gina, anything you want to comment on very quickly with those last few topics?
I was going to say, I'm quite surprised about Robinsons. I would have thought it'd be a very successful partnership. And, it's always sort of, we grew up with it, didn't we? Robinsons there at the side of all the tennis tournaments. So I'm surprised about that. I think on the trans issue, it's really interesting because I think there is an awful lot of pressure on young people to make decisions at a very young age. And there has to be a really nuanced but honest discussion about this. It's being hijacked by so many different parties and so many different pressure groups. This is actually something that cannot be reversed easily if you go through the surgery. And to make decisions at such young ages when children are going through puberty or to take blockers or different sorts of drugs, the pain and the long-term effects of that has to be taken into consideration in a much more nuanced way than it's being at the moment. We have to care more about what people are going through mentally and physically.
Gina, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for your comments. It's always fascinating having you on the programme. And I've loved you sitting in my hot seat, so do come back. That's all I've got time for now and this week. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock Monday. Coming up next is Dame Arlene Forster. First, though, here's the weather. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Again, today the weather's going to be fairly mixed. Some warm sunshine, but also some heavy downpours. And that mixture of Sunshine and showers will continue through the weekend. We are, though, going to see things turning cooler and fresher through the weekend as this cold front moves in. But it's only slowly approaching at the moment. It'll bring some wet weather later to parts of the southwest, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ahead of it, we've still got the relatively warm and humid air, and the Met Office have issued a yellow thunderstorm warning. We're concerned about downpours over parts of northeast England and southeast Scotland. Hit and miss, but some torrential rain is possible. Large hailstones could also be an issue. Elsewhere, well, 1 or 2 showers, but plenty of sunny spells across much of Scotland. Some brighter weather across the east. We'll see temperatures again into the mid-20s, but elsewhere temperatures a little lower than of late and turning fresher as this band of rain moves in through the evening. So most places seeing some rain during the overnight period. That band of rain swinging its way northwards. That is that cold front, and so temperatures won't be as high overnight. It will still